Hi everyone, this is Stacy Emerson again, Stewardship Facilitator for ABC USA through Mission Resource Development. I welcome you to today's webinar on Generosity and Stewardship Trends with Marcia Shetler. In a minute, I'm going to turn things over to Marcia, but a few housekeeping details first. If you are on with us, if you could please mute your sound so that we don't hear background sounds as we go through the webinar, that would be great. And also, you are free to write down questions in the question box on the panel that comes with GoToWebinar. And at the end, we'll have an opportunity to share our questions with Marcia. Thanks so much. So Marcia is the current Executive Director and CEO of the Ecumenical Stewardship Center, where she began in March of 2011. She is a wonderful resource and has been leading ESC in a great way in the last few years, and has so much to share with us about stewardship ministry that recognizes and celebrates the diversity of Christ Church and the common call to all disciples to the sacred practice of stewardship. Marcia, we're so glad to have you with us today and look forward to our time together. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Stacy, and thanks to Stacy and Bridget and Tina, who are all helping with the presentation today. I have a PowerPoint to share with you, so I'll be asking Bridget to change the slides as we go along. It's a pleasure to be with sisters and brothers from the American Baptist Churches USA and perhaps other denominations as well. The Ecumenical Stewardship Center has 20 different denominational partners, 3 in Canada and 17 in the U.S., and we're grateful for those partnerships, and especially today to say a special thank you to ABC USA for your partnership in ESC's mission and ministry. So if we look at the next slide, Stacy's question to me today was, can you prepare something along the lines of trends in generosity and stewardship? So that's what we're going to look at today. If we can go to the next slide, we're going to start with a few trends about U.S. philanthropy. We're going to start, before we get into trends, into things that actually have remained kind of the same over the years. For decades, the percentage of giving of income in the U.S. hasn't changed. It is about 2%, and it's been that way for decades. And you'll see at the bottom of some of the slides links to places where I got this data online. And our next slide also shows us something that has been the same for decades and that you actually might find a bit surprising. There is little difference between the percentage of income given by Christians and non-Christians in the U.S. Some denominations talk about the tithe strongly. Others, of course, encourage strong giving. But even with all of that, there is little difference between the giving between Christians and non-Christians in the U.S. So if you look at the next slide, you might be asking, well, what has changed then? Well, one of the largest and greatest changes that has happened in the philanthropic landscape of the U.S. is the number of nonprofits. They just continue to grow and grow and grow. For example, over the last, this time frame that they have here from 2001 to 2011, the number of U.S. nonprofits grew about 25%. And correlating to that, the number of for-profit businesses only grew about 0.5%. Now, of course, if you think about your recent economic history, you know, at least for those last years, of that time frame. There was a good bit of economic turmoil in the U.S., but even so, there's a large difference between the businesses that were established during that time frame and the nonprofits. So there is this sense of generosity, and how is that going to be accomplished? And one of the ways that that has happened in the U.S. is just the creation of more nonprofits. And the next slide tells us how many there are. From 2014 statistics, the number of U.S. nonprofits is about 1.6 million. That's an amazing number of organizations that have the common good as part of their mission. It takes many, many forms, of course, but yet there's 1.6 million nonprofits in the U.S. Good news, if we're looking at giving trends, while it has gone up and down over the past few years, especially around the U.S. economy, last year, 2014, total giving was the highest ever at $358 billion. That's the upside, but there is a downside for religious giving. And the next slide tells us that the money given to religious organizations continues to decrease. It's still the largest share of the U.S. philanthropic pie, but over time, the numbers continue to decrease. On the next slide, you see a quote from a friend of mine, David King, who's chair and director of the Lake Institute on Faith and Giving. That's part of the Indiana University in Indianapolis, and they are also connected to the IU School of Philanthropy. In the report that they just put out, which included that number about giving in the U.S. and the totals, he has this quote, which I'll paraphrase to say, "Giving to religion is the highest that it's ever been. However, it continues to decline, and since 1987, so we're getting close to 30 years there, it has dropped from almost, well, a little over half of philanthropic giving to now down to about a third. So it's lost a significant amount of dollars in percentages, even though the numbers are still high." He has another quote, too, that I've added on our next slide. "Giving to religions decline over time as a share of the total reflects that fewer Americans currently identify with a religion, attend worship services, or give to houses of worship." I imagine for most of you this is not surprising or new news. It's something that is affecting churches throughout the United States. While some have said that it's particularly affected mainline churches, there's data now that indicates that it's churches of all different kinds of theologically and worship styles across the board. So in general, giving is going down to churches. And there are also some generational trends tied to that that we're going to get into a little more. So if religion isn't getting the money, who is getting it? This chart is from Giving USA, excuse me, and it shows you the different pieces of the philanthropic pie. Religion is still at the top, but the next 2 and 3 are very, if you combine them all together, they're pretty close to religion giving as well, actually a little ahead. Education is second. If you give to your college or your seminary or some other kind of educational institution, You know that educational institutions, for the most part, are very savvy about obtaining gifts. They have large development departments, they have lots of staff, they have people who are educated and understand how to get major gifts. They have people who are educated and understand how to help donors get the most impact out of their gifts, even as a personal benefit. So it's not surprising to me that education is second in that list. Human services follows that, then gifts to foundations, and you see the rest of the way around the circle there. To me, when I look at this chart too, I also think a bit of the generations and how that plays into it. Younger generations, for example, may have more interest in the environment, and they may have more interest in arts and culture, but yet they're the ones that are getting less money. Well, they're also the ones at this point in their lives that have less income. So it may be that over time, those pieces of the pie will continue to grow because of younger generations continuing to amass wealth there. And speaking of generations, if we look at the next slide, here's a little bit of an overview of what generation characteristics might be. And I'll put in a little personal anecdote here. I have two children. One was born in 1978, which puts her at the end of what's titled their net generation. You might also know it as Generation X. My son was born in 1981, so he is at the beginning of the millennial generation. And I know that you cannot stereotype, and this certainly is not meant to be a stereotype, but it continues to amaze me, even though they're only 3 years apart, how much they mirror their generational cohort. The things that they do, the way that they act, the way that they conduct themselves socially. It's just, sometimes it's quite mind-boggling. And to me, what that says is that what happens around us influences our behavior. You know, what we experience as a mass or a generation influences our behavior. And I also look at some of the other characteristics, knowing, for example, that my parents are in the builders generation. So, you know, do the math and you know what generation I'm in. But anyway, when I look across that line about membership, I think about conversations that I've had with my parents and how membership in something is very important to them. And as you look over this list and think about folks that you know that fit into these generational characteristics, these generational categories, you also might find similar characteristics. It's just very interesting. If you have a lot of interest in this topic, I would encourage you to look for books by Strauss and Howe, H-O-W-E, who've done a lot of study on generational characteristics. So far we have looked at the what of philanthropic giving in the United States. And we've looked a little bit at the who. So if we go to the next slide, I'll share a little bit about some research that I did when I was in my master's program at St. Mary's University of Minnesota in Winona. I have a master's in philanthropy and development, and I chose for my research project looking at annual giving. And annual giving is the giving that we've been talking about, not legacy gifts or planned gifts or deferred gifts, but the gifts that come day to day out of our annual income. And I came up with six characteristics what I think annual giving is becoming. And while I did my research in about 2008, I think these characteristics are still very evident and, if anything, getting stronger. So this donor-driven, relationship-focused, choice-abundant, boundary-bereft, and information-rich. So let's look into those a little bit deeper if we can go to the next slide. So what do we mean by donor-driven? Well, generations giving characteristics are increasingly defining the appeals. If you think back to the chart with the different generational cohorts, those are motivators for giving that are different between generations. I talked about my parents and membership. Something that relates to membership is going to pique their interest maybe more than it would with my son. However, how he would define membership is his connection with his friends, which is very strong. My son and his wife have a circle of friends that they spend a lot of time with and are important to them. Would they characterize it as membership? No, but it's still an importance on relationship, which goes to the second point of relationship focus. Relationships continue to strongly influence giving. Think about things like Facebook or Kickstarter, where people are inviting other people to give through social media or personally or with a letter or with a telephone call, some kind of a reference. People are making decisions based on other people's endorsements of ways to give or places to give. Choice abundant, well, we talked about that. There are literally millions of giving choices as the number of nonprofits continues to grow, and even things like Kickstarter, Facebook, millions of ways that people can be generous. That continues to grow. Boundary bereft, the lines of ways that people give and what they give to are getting blurrier all the time. Companies, for-profit companies, give as well, but they are looking at their giving as the way in which they can make the most impact. They're going to look for giving to organizations that are also going to raise their own credibility as a PR benefit. Does it match their values? Does it put them in a good light? Individual donors, if they can't find organizations or ways to give that suit them, they're creating their own ways, things like donor-advised funds or foundations that help them get the maximum out of their income and give to the organizations that they really want to give to. So the boundaries between giving and how they've traditionally happened in the past are disappearing. Time transcendent, well, because of the internet, giving can happen all the time, 24/7 in a variety of ways. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. And information rich, donors expect information about your vision, about your ministry in ways that they haven't expected it before, because information has become such an important part of what we do and who we are. There has to be, you have to make, in philanthropic terms, a good case for your mission. So that, you might be saying, well, that's great, but what does that mean for our church? Well, here are a couple of, I think we skipped one too far. There we go. Here are some ways that you might be able to apply these trends to your congregation. Is your congregation reaching out to different generations in different ways? I recently heard a story about a congregation who decided for their annual financial stewardship campaign, they were going to write different letters to different generations. That was the first time they'd ever done that. Well, this was the way that they were living out this first trend, that we're going to make invitations to different people differently. Relationship focused. Do you invite your members to invite others to give? Do they know how to do that? That might be something that you could work on. Choice abundant. Is your church making a good case to be the preferred giving place for your members? For example, if a disaster happens in your town or even in another town in the U.S., which place are your members going to think of giving first? To the Red Cross or to your church and your church's disaster arm, because they know that it's a trusted organization and their dollars will get where they want them to go? I mean, that's a valid question you need to ask today. Boundary bereft. Are you offering giving opportunities beyond the Sunday morning offering plate? And there are many ways that that can happen. Oh, that was time transcendent. I'm sorry. Boundary bereft is kind of the same, but a different end. Are you offering any opportunities for legacy gifts? And what kind of funds do you have in your church? Do you have designated gifts in an endowment? Are there ways that you could start one of those to accomplish some specific areas of mission? And finally, information rich. Are you going beyond the numbers when you ask people to give? Is it just about meeting the budget and that's what they receive? Do you have a narrative budget? And are you showing ways throughout the year how your congregation members' gifts are making a difference and how they're supporting your mission and ministry? Now we can go to the next one. So we've talked a little bit about some general ideas on how you might enhance what your congregation is doing around stewardship. This list is from a study that Barbara Fullerton did from Canada. She is a former stewardship development staff person for the United Church of Canada. She's now serving as a pastor at the Paris United Church in Paris, Ontario. And she is a graduate of Wesley Seminary and did a doctoral project while she was at Wesley surveying congregations in the United Church of Canada. For about 6 years, their giving in the United Church of Canada was increasing while denominations around it were decreasing. So Barbara wanted to find out why. And she came up with these 9 best practices for generous congregations. As part of your attendance today, you're going to receive this whole article. That will be sent to you so you can read through Barbara's whole article and learn more about these 9 best practices and the rationale behind that. So we won't spend a lot more time here, but encourage you to read the whole article. And moving on to the next slide, maybe at this point you're saying, well, I don't even know where to start. While it may seem like too much of an emphasis on financial stewardship as opposed to stewardship as a whole, I would encourage you to think about a designated annual financial stewardship emphasis. While you may say, well, but folks in our church, they say all we do is talk about money. It is a way to say Well, it isn't all we do, but you know what? We are going to talk about money, and we're going to talk about the importance it is as part of all of our stewardship to God. So having a time, a week, a month, or specified times during the year where you lift up financial stewardship can be a place to start. This slide is another summary of an article from Giving Magazine, and you also will be getting a copy of this entire article. Ed Taylor used to sit in the ESC Executive Director's chair. He also was editor of the magazine and now is pastor at a Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Illinois. And he has shared these 6 reasons why it's important to have an annual stewardship emphasis. Again, we won't spend a lot of time going over these. You'll be getting the whole article that Ed wrote, and I encourage you to read that for some more in-depth comment on these reasons that Ed says are important reasons to have an annual stewardship emphasis. As I mentioned, ESC Ecumenical Stewardship Center is a partner with American Baptist Churches USA and other denominations. We consider ourselves, though, as serving the whole North American church, providing resources around generosity and stewardship. And so I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share some of those with you today as you continue to think about what you can do in your congregation to encourage generous giving and faithful stewardship. I talked a bit about the annual stewardship emphasis. Our Giving magazine and related materials are a wonderful way to get started. We currently have 17 different themes that are illustrated through the different issues of the magazine and corresponding theme materials and the companion resource. The magazine, each one includes a center section which you can use to create your emphasis with a special Sunday or special event and other pieces around it, how to enhance your worship services, how to include all the different generations in your congregation in the emphasis. The theme materials include things like bulletin inserts and bookmarks and commitment cards and other materials that give your emphasis an integrated look that people will recognize throughout your emphasis. And finally, the companion resource includes additional worship and study resources that you can use for your emphasis. And Judson Press sells some of these things, so you can check there, see what they have, and also check our website at stewardshipresources.org to find the materials you need. If you want to do something yet in 2015, it's not too late. I think both Judson Press and ESC have materials in stock, and we can get them to you, and you can have a stewardship emphasis yet this calendar year. We also offer events that give you a chance to come and meet with others who are interested in stewardship and generosity from across North America with great leadership, great topics, and a way to delve into the subject even further. Our 2 primary events are Leadership Seminar and the North American Conference on Christian Philanthropy. Leadership Seminar explores a current stewardship topic and their impacts on the church. The first week of December 2015 is the next one, and I'm delighted to say that it will be at an ABC congregation, St. Charles Baptist Church in New Orleans, Louisiana. The topic is Where Your Treasure Is, Christians and Wealth in North America. And we have 2 great plenary speakers coming, Shane Claiborne and Kelly Johnson. It's not too late to register. There's a few weeks left, so please go to the website if you're interested, and you can learn more about Leadership Seminar. Would love to see you there. The North American Conference on Christian Philanthropy has plenary sessions and workshops, all kinds of ways that you can increase your knowledge about faithful stewardship and generous giving in a practical sense. What are the best practices for gift planning, and what are the best practices for narrative budgets and annual giving, as well as some great plenary speakers. Our next NACCP actually will be happening in Canada, and we're so happy about the opportunity to partner with some organizations there for the Pursuit 2016, which will be at the end of April. We will have registration up in January, so please check back and think about coming to Canada. It's going to be a great conference. Some innovations regarding attendance that we're really excited about, including the opportunity for you to have some pre-conference learning, as well as getting to know folks ahead of time, and many great speakers on site. So you might want to go ahead and mark that on your calendar. Next up, we also have a series of online courses. If you like to learn in the comfort of your home, with your feet up on the ottoman, but got technology right at hand, I'd encourage you to be a part of our online courses. We have 6 different units that are listed there. If you go to the website, you can see when they are offered. We have great instructors, stewardship thought leaders, and practitioners and authors that are doing a wonderful job leading these courses. And again, you have the opportunity to interact with folks from throughout North America who are interested in the topic. Holistic Stewardship is the course currently being offered. There are still a few days to register. It's not too late. So I encourage you to do that if you're interested. The lectures include real-time conference calls and audiographic sessions, and the folks really appreciate the opportunity to connect with each other and delve into these topics a little deeper. We also have, on the next slide, an initiative especially for young adults, connecting them with faith and finances, and it's called Compass. This is taking place all through social media. We have a web page, a Facebook page, a blog on WordPress, and a Twitter feed. So encourage you to check this out if you have young people that are looking for resources, especially around faith and finances. We encourage you to have them check this out as well. We continue to grow the people that are participating in this, and we have a steering committee of a half a dozen folks who help us decide on the topics and information to share through Compass. We also have a capital campaign network. If your congregation is thinking about some kind of a major gift emphasis, looking to raise funds for a particular project, we have folks from our denominations who do this as their ministry, who have made themselves available to ESC for any of our partner congregations to use their services. Of course, it's more than just fundraising, and all of our consultants look at this as an opportunity for your congregation to improve their understanding about stewardship overall, along with your special project fundraising. So if you have interest in that and would like to learn more about how a capital campaign consultant can serve you, you can check that out on the website. And finally, my last piece of this resource list is ESC's newest resource called Journey to Generosity. And if you jump quickly to the next slide, this is a cohort-based learning opportunity for congregational leaders to learn more about and actually develop a year-round stewardship plan for your congregation. You make a one-year commitment. You meet 2 to 3 times face-to-face in a day-long meeting. Our current cohorts also are meeting through conference calls occasionally, and you receive a large resource book full of ideas and plans, as well as the conversations you have with each other to help you create a year-long stewardship program for your congregation. And you can see there that there's quite a list of topics that are covered. If you have interest in this, I encourage you to reach out to Stacy especially. She and I are having conversations soon about the possibility of launching this in ABC USA. So I know that she'd be happy to hear from you about your interest, and I would be delighted to get some cohort groups going with ABC USA with Journey to Generosity. So moving ahead, we've talked some about the what. You know, what is being given, and we've talked some about the who. Who is giving it? We've talked some about resources available to make those things happen, but we haven't really talked too much about the why. And sometimes that's the hardest piece of our conversations. In our hearts, we know why we give, but it can be really hard to articulate it. I had a really interesting conversation a couple weeks ago, one of those random ones that you get from people who stumble across what you're doing. And let me tell you, that does happen. This person had stumbled across the Ecumenical Stewardship Center webpage, and he called me to have a conversation about it. He said, you know, I've really been looking around at different websites and different pages and different things on the internet about giving, and from all different religions and all walks of life. He said, and there's just so much of it. He said, it's just overwhelming. He said, but you know, when I found the ESC website, he said, I really liked what you had to say. He said, and I felt that it did a pretty good job of explaining the Christian aspect of stewardship. And I was very pleased, and I thanked him very much. And when I hung up with him, I thought, yes, you know, that is still our mission and ministry, is to not only talk about generosity, but the particular way that Christians approach it. So are there unique things about Christian generosity that we can talk about? And I'm sure that if we had the opportunity for a conversation, you could give me a list. But today I'm going to give you a few things that you can either add to your list or you can use as your own starting place. If we look at the next slide, we see what is kind of the big encompassing definition for stewardship, if you think of it that way. You know, beyond the financial stewardship piece of it, this quote, which I've seen often by Dave Stotts, is, stewardship is everything we do after we say we believe. So if you take a moment and think about that, our stewardship is a way that we witness to our own authenticity. You know, we have said that we believe in Jesus. We've said that we are Christians, and actually how we act as Christian stewards is a measure of our authenticity to that belief. I find this interesting from the epistles. Both Paul and Peter talk about stewardship, but they don't mention money at all. They say that we are stewards of God's mysteries and we're stewards of the manifold grace of God. What amazing things to be caretakers of. And again, when you begin to think about stewardship in this way, you begin to develop that mindset of abundance as opposed to a mindset of scarcity. If we think of God as an abundant God, and we are stewards of those mysteries and of that grace, how can we not have our own mindset of abundance as opposed to a mindset of scarcity? So there are three marks of authenticity that we might think about. One is unity and community, which in this day and age seems to be becoming an increasingly scarce commodity. But with a theology of abundance and a mindset of abundance, we certainly can mirror unity and community in our own faith communities and beyond. And if you think about the verse in Acts where the first Christians held all things in common, the beginning of that verse is that they were of one heart and mind. So their generosity led to their unity and their willingness to live and work together. They were very much intertwined. So one mark of authenticity is that unity and community. A second one is care for the needy. Absolutely a witness. We see these verses from the Gospels that we're all very familiar with, the story about the sheep and the goats, which ends with Jesus telling them, you know, as you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. Our generosity is a witness of our care for the world, another important mark of our authenticity. And finally, and here's one that might be kind of a new idea for you, but generosity is evangelism. And the well-known story of the loaves and the fishes, we know that story well, and maybe in your mind, I know in mine, kind of, and they ate and were satisfied, and that's the end of the story. But the last sentence here, what the people said, this is indeed the prophet who has come into the world. What happened with the loaves and the fishes was a witness to Christ's power and God's power. And we could debate about, well, you know, they were just happy because they had something to eat. But I do think that it went beyond that, and that our generosity really can be a witness to the world and a way to bring others to Christ as well. Jim Shepard and Chris Willard probably said that a bit more articulately than I did. And their book, Contagious Generosity, Creating a Culture of Giving in Your Church, is a very good one and another one that I would recommend. But their quote here is very good and finishes up with, you realize that people have an interest in money both inside and outside your church, and the challenge is, can you use that to help folks connect with Jesus? So if for no other reason, what I would leave you with today, before we have time for questions, is, if for no other reason, to think about stewardship and generosity in your congregation is that the message really does matter. What you do with it, how you incorporate it, into the life of your church really does matter. Even though we don't think it's the case, people are still watching. People are watching what we do as Christians. They're watching the way that we give. They're watching the way that we act. So I encourage you to think about how that part of your ministry fits into the whole message that really does matter. So Stacy, I'll turn it back to you as far as any questions or comments.
This is Bridget, actually. We do have one question from Sandra Dursinable. She has asked, how can we address Christian generosity depending on regions?
Okay. Well, I will give a bit of a general answer, and then Stacy, I invite you as one who's more familiar with ABC USA to chime in if you'd like. I do think that culture plays into how we look at generosity and stewardship. For example, with an annual financial stewardship emphasis, in some denominations, that's very common. That's just part of what they do. In others, it's not at all. In my home denomination, it's not at all. There are very few congregations that have an annual stewardship emphasis. But I still think that it's an important part of congregational life, and that congregations should consider adding it. My own congregation, and really without encouragement from me, honestly, is one of the ones that does have an annual emphasis, and my pastor says he appreciates that it's about more than just the money, that it looks at the whole of stewardship, and it gives him an opportunity to talk about that. So my question, or my comment back to Sandra would be, do involve your congregation in the process, and be willing to ask those kind of questions. You know, we want to make stewardship a stronger emphasis, and generosity a stronger emphasis in our church, and maybe even a more comfortable emphasis. What are the best ways to make that happen that people will understand and resonate with? And that might be a different answer in Massachusetts than it is in Phoenix, Arizona. But I'll stop there. And Stacy, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, and with Sandra, in regard to regional differences, I know Sandra is in Massachusetts and I am in Connecticut, and one of the characteristics of New England spirituality is a sort of great secrecy and privateness around finances. And so at least in this region of the country, probably despite denomination, I don't think it's just American Baptist, there is a prevailing culture around that we have to overcome. And so like you were saying, to work with leadership, to increase education and understanding is a great place to begin to try to crack through that sense of privacy for the sake of the stewardship ministry, because it is so essential to our, not only our life together as congregations, but to our walk as disciples of Christ. So being able to include that as part of our life together and not something that's separate or kept private is definitely a challenge for us in New England. So I think maybe that might be part of what she was wondering about. And I see Bridget has another question.
Yes, Brad Donahoe has asked, regarding the general differences, would it be advisable to consider an alternative to traditional pledging for the Xers and millennials?
That's a great question. I think that there are a couple ways to look at it. First of all, I would maybe raise the question up a level to say, make sure what your purpose is for pledging. If your purpose for pledging in people's minds is so that the church can meet its budget, there's the first place where I would maybe try to have some conversation about, well, maybe it needs to be not so much about meeting the budget as it is helping people understand what it means to set aside that piece of what God has given them to give back. And when you frame it that way, that's a different way to reach those younger generations. Because for especially the millennials, and that is one of the reasons we have Compass, the initiative for young adults, is because of how they are, first of all, because they're young and upcoming, and second, because of the economic framework that they're in and they've inherited. Finance is a huge concern for them, a huge concern. The amount of debt that students amass as they're coming out of college is just huge. They have been encouraged to go into debt from the time they've been able to practically watch TV. You know, you go to a college campus, there are credit card companies there trying to get them to sign up. So to think about not just the pledging piece, but the whole financial management piece, and incorporating that into how they can be encouraged to look at their finances in the view of a culture of abundance and how God would like them to respond, might be a better conversation to have than to just say, you know, part of your response is that part of your role as a Christian is to pledge to the church. Well, no, that's probably not the best tack to take. But if you can, again, frame it in language that helps them understand that this is part of their call as Christians, is to give back, that would be, in my opinion, that might be a better way to frame it. And it opens the conversation about finances. One of the best ways that you might want to think about reaching the younger generations is to plan courses or classes or conversations around how to manage their finances, because, like I said, the debt is a huge issue for many of them.
I want to thank Marcia Shetler for sharing this time with us as we try to understand the giving and generosity and stewardship trends of the 21st century and all the challenges that we face in our ministry together for the very sake of Christ. Marcia, thank you so much for your time today. And I want to let everyone know that this webinar will continue to be available through our ABC USA website. So you can go there to preview it again or to share it with others. And also on that website, there are places for you to find some of the resources that Marcia has talked about, as well as to sign up for our generosity newsletter through ABC USA. So again, Marcia, thanks so much, and I wish you all a blessed day.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. God bless you all.